go.
Yeah.
Now it's on.
Okay, well, I had to, yeah, there we go. Okay. So I'm going to try to go through this maybe a little quicker than normal. I have to run over and give a talk on climate change at the local high school right after this. So I will go a little faster than expected, but I'll try to leave time for questions. So this is list on this presentation of myself and John Yoder. Better to go look at the full list. John was the principal investigator on this project, which I'll give a little more background in a second here. Involved folks at WSU, also Joe Cook from UW, and a few others, some graduate students. But John was the principal investigator. I'm also an economist in the same department over at WSU. So what was this background of the project? So this had a very specific legislative charge, came out of Representative Dungy. The State of Washington Water Research Center is to prepare separate benefit cost analyses for each proposed project. As opposed to the previous BCs for the IP had done, there was just a single BC for the entire IP, Yakima Basin Integrated Plan. So the focus was on looking separately the benefits of fish abundance increases, irrigation water reliability, and municipal domestic water supply reliability. And with the additional charge to use existing studies to the greatest extent possible. And the previous was the 4 counts analysis, which was the benefit cost ratio for the entire IP together. So you essentially get a single BC as opposed to a project by project. And so our task was really to try to do a project by project. So just what I want to go over in this talk, focus on the impacts of climate. So we did climate scenarios, both historical benefits from the IP projects based on historical climate, but then also under future climate scenarios, we looked at 4 different climate scenarios. And then we also wanted to look at interactions between climate market scenarios, so the amount of water that gets traded around both within district and between districts, and on different amounts of IP development, which means how many of the projects are done individually or done together. So this text will be a little too small to read. This is on the Department of Ecology's website, though. Some of you may be familiar with it. There was a suite of projects, both everything from like K-to-K pipeline, bumping lake, pool raise, Weimer Dam. So there was a whole suite of projects related to additional water storage. What were the modeling methods? So we really built off the Scott model in 2004, and that was also used in the HDR analysis. So that part of the trying to use existing models as much as possible. So we took that as sort of the core part. A lot of what I did was that was a spreadsheet-based model. It was a little limiting, though, in trying to consider a range of curtailment and market trading scenarios. So I converted the spreadsheet model over to a Python-based model. Still the same guts, but that way we could essentially write loops to consider all curtailment scenarios. The initial previous study just looked at 2 curtailments, so 30% or 70%. We just looped it so you ran 0 to 100% curtailment for each scenario. And then also did a market, basically developed a water trading model so that we could consider more varying amounts of trading both within district and between districts as opposed to assuming a fixed amount of water, which was what was done in the previous study. So that just provided more flexibility. So I think there's anything else here. So we looked at, the goal then eventually though was to get the expected net present value of various projects. So just a quick overview of the irrigation districts here: Rosa, WIP, KRD, SVID, Yakima Tides, and then the Kittitas senior rights. These are all the water rights holders that were considered. Those are their entitlements, average water use in non-drought years, and total profit. And those are the numbers that on the right there that we didn't change from the previous analyses. The climate scenarios. If you have any questions about these, you can go find Jenny Adam around someplace. She's really the mastermind behind developing the climate scenarios. But here's what it looks like. So the black is the historical. So those are the actual curtailment rates back to the 1930s. So basically those at the bottom are the years in which there's no curtailment. And then the black dots going up to 100% were the historical, so you can see the early 90s droughts, 2001, 2005 in there. But you see what happens with the future climate scenario, curtailments certainly increase quite substantially. And that's the most adverse climate scenario. Okay, so the effects of the IP storage on basin-wide curtailment. So the historical, so that's an unconditional expected value. So it's just it's the average curtailment rate, including the non-curtailment. So it's not conditional on a curtailment. It's just the average over all years. So 11% is the mean, and then up to the 56 under the most adverse climate scenario. So it's a pretty significant effect. So here's the results that looking at, well, what if we vary the assumptions on the amount of water that gets moved around? And essentially the reason why you get different numbers here is if you're basically moving water from low value to high value crops. So one of the assumptions in the previous study was we call proportional curtailment. So you just curtail whatever the drought percentage is, you curtail the water allocation to each crop in proportion to the amount of water that each crop gets in a non-drought year. So there's really, that's sort of an extreme scenario. You know, you get there if you assumed all farms only had one crop and there was no trading at all. It would be that's kind of the way you can rationalize that. But we wanted to vary the amount of water that, say, gets moved around within a district or, say, between ROSA and SVID. So that's what those are these results here on the left there. So you can see that the more trading that goes on, the more you're able to mitigate drought. And that's why that annual net value of production is higher when we allow both intra and intra-district trading versus intra-district only, or you get the biggest negative impacts on production when you don't have any trading. And the graph there on the right are the differences in the marginal values of water. Okay, so just the way the numbers work out in terms of aggregate annual production. So at a 70% curtailment, which was about what this year was. ROSA was about a 70% curtailment. So under no trade, the impact on production is minus $162 million. If you allow intra-district trading, so sort of we call it kind of frictionless intra-district trading, so you get curtailing of the lowest value crops first. It's minus $85.5 million. If you allow trading between districts and within district, the impacts are down to negative 54. So it's an important assumption. Okay, so what about the expected net present value of agricultural benefits of the IP over the baseline? What are the benefits of the projects over the time horizon? So 84.3 million under the historical climate, and they almost actually more than quadruple going up to the most adverse climate. So you can really see you're going to get very different results if you assume historical versus if you assume most adverse climate scenarios.
What's IP?
Integrated plan. So in the integrated plan, just real quick, that's both the storage, but then also includes, there was some market enhancement, some funds for market enhancement, but then also fish-related habitat development projects. Okay, well, I actually made it. So summary of results. So climate change increases curtailment frequency and severity in the basin quite substantially. More storage reduces curtailments and market impacts of drought and climate. Diminishing returns to water storage, so the value of a project's lower if the others are implemented too. This makes probably intuitive sense. So if you just did only one new water storage project, that's the way to get the highest value for that individual project. Our goal wasn't really to try to consider the political separability, I guess you could call it, more to just consider some of these projects are tied together in terms of hydrology, and so we considered that. We didn't consider, and this has come up in some of the responses to the report, of how much the projects can be politically disentangled, and that wasn't our charge, so that wasn't anything we considered. Diminishing returns to water storage. Oh, sorry, I did that one. Storage and markets as technical substitutes. And I think this is an important part, given that the IP included both market enhancement and new water storage. So the more storage that you have, the less the value that you get from market enhancement. Alternatively, the more trading you have between water rights holders within a district or between district, the lower is the value of any new storage projects. So at these levels, they're essentially they're substitutes, which is, I think, important to consider. Okay, and I think we have a few minutes for questions. Sorry to go through that a little quicker than I thought I would. Yeah.
So it seemed like the charge was to evaluate the cost-benefit trade-offs on the individual projects.
Mm-hmm.
So I took that to mean individual storage projects and ecological enhancement.
And the fish, and the habitat, the fish-related projects.
But if I understood what you presented, those were all integrated project IP results rather than results of individual projects.
Yeah, so for the point of this talk, we didn't propose this as just working through the results from that report. We figured that report's out there. So if you want to look at the BCs for project by project, you can go get that report and work through them. They're on the Water Research Center website, and I think I don't know if Department of Ecology has them, but they're on the Water Research Center. So if you want to look at the project by project BCAs. The review of the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan. So that's the Washington State Water Research Center would be the website to go to get that. I'm sure that I can never quite find my way around the legislature websites. I'm sure it's there somewhere. But you may want to go to the Water Research Center's website. Yeah.
You talk about the higher value crops. That trees, crops. I think they're not, you can't change one to the other too easily.
Yeah.
So it seems like you kind of know the size and value of each of those crops. Is that sort of mixed into the way you're looking at it? So you can imagine that plastic could be moved, land could be moved from one thing into another.
Well, I think you have to explicitly think about farm level crop diversity, right? So if a farm has two fields, one has a perennial crop, the other has irrigated pasture, what are they going to do when they only get 30% of their water? They're not going to water the pasture, right? They're going to water their apples. If you assume, and this is where we're actually learning a lot about this because we're doing a sort of data collection project with WSDA, DOE on the 2015 drought. Because before this, you really had to just make assumptions on what people did. If you assume there's a lot of at least farm level diversity, or you assume that there's trading between farms within district, right? So that doesn't go through ecology. So farmer A goes to B and says, "I'll pay you this amount per acre. Fallow the pasture so I can irrigate cherries." And so the amount that you think of the drought is affecting high value crops versus low value crops, which will really, actually I gave a talk yesterday walking through this, will really affect what you think the economic impacts are. Before this, we're kind of guessing, trying to give upper bound, lower bound. We know a lot more after this year because of 2015 about which crops are affected. They did do a tour with Scott Revelle, the Rose Irrigation District Manager, to look at impacts, and I didn't get to go on that, unfortunately, but from what I heard, all the brand new high density apple orchards look fine. They clearly got water. The older orchards that were probably going to be, so the three-dimensional orchards that were likely probably going to be torn out and maybe replaced with a brand new field of high density Honeycrisp or something, that those may have been, the tear out of those was maybe accelerated this year. And there clearly was some pasture that was irrigated. So it's somewhere in between, right, these two extremes of totally curtailing water without any regard to the value, which is, assuming that, say, there's no trading at all and each farm only grows one crop, or that you can very easily reallocate water from low to high value crops, either through trading or through on-farm crop diversity. But we'll know a lot more this winter after reviewing 2015 than we did last winter. Yeah, and it's somewhere in the middle, and we'd like to have a good more confidence of where in the middle as opposed to presenting the upper and lower bounds. But that's where we were at last winter. So the drought wasn't great for the region, but it helps here. Yeah.
Have these results started to inform any management choices, or do you see them informing?
Yeah. So I mean, this report got a pretty good amount of attention. John is the person to email about that. You know, he gets all the emails. I'm not tenured yet, so that was partly strategic. Also, John's a great principal investigator. So he's testified quite a bit before the state legislature on this. And there was a back and forth with Michael Garrity from American Rivers in one of the newspapers. I don't remember which is interesting. So there was a lot of feedback from various stakeholder groups. And there's right now the K2K pipeline is the one that's I think closest to underway. So yeah, I think the answer is yes. It's gotten a pretty good amount of attention. Yeah.
So my understanding is some of these storage projects have benefits for fish. So
Yeah.
they're sort of technical substitutes you're talking about.
Yeah.
But they're not for fish. So how does that change planning?
So whether or not they have both fish and both in-stream and out-of-stream benefits. Yeah, so those the fish benefits are separated out from the agriculture benefits in that report. I wasn't involved in any of the fish on the fish side, so I don't know those numbers off the top of my head. But the fish related benefits, and actually in the original IP, most of the benefits are fish. Like I don't want to say the exact number. I don't remember. It's been a little while, but most of the total benefits of the IP. Fish made up a majority of the benefits relative to ag and muni.
Any
All
other
right, well,
questions?
All right.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks a lot.